It's time to take your seat in the front row with Mike Vaccaro. Here's your host, Mike Vaccaro.
Hey, thank you, Chuck, and welcome everybody in the front row with Mike Vaccaro. I am your host. Behind the scenes, as always, J.R. Quitman, our creator, producer, and director. And we always remind you as well, this is a CLNS Media Network podcast. Up to episode number 61, and it's a great story. Larry Farmer grew up in Denver, played basketball at UCLA, a member of 3 national championship teams. He went 89-1 his 3 years on the varsity team, played for some great teammates, including Bill Walton. We have some great stories about Bill Walton, obviously about his head coach, John Wooden, who won 10 championships at UCLA and such a great tactician as a coach. We hear some great stories about the first time and the last time that Larry Farmer had a chance to speak to John Wooden. Eventually going into coaching, Larry Farmer would coach at UCLA, other stops at Weber State and at Loyola Chicago as well. We get into all that with him. We also hear about Sister Jean when he was with Chicago, and a great story about the team chaplain there who's made news recently as a big fan of the Ramblers from Loyola Chicago. Great episode here, great stories. It is the story of Larry Farmer, episode number 61 of In the Front Row. Larry, it's an honor to have you with us here today. I appreciate you spending a little time with us. A lot to get into about your life and certainly about your new book that came out in February, Role of a Lifetime, that talks about your playing career, also your coaching career as well. But let's get into how things started for you. Born back in 1951, you grew up in Denver. Tell us about life in Denver back at that time and where basketball was in your life early on.
Right. Very close-knit family. Sports was always a big part of my life. My mother and father preached academics, and so everything athletic had to come after everything academic. But I was a late starter with basketball. I started playing basketball in PE in junior high school. And, you think by today's standards, kids are pretty much well along and playing AAU basketball by the time they get to junior high school. But I picked up the game late. And the first time I actually played basketball where I was being coached, I was a sophomore in high school. So again, a very late start. I had a very good foundation in terms of sports. I could run, I could jump pretty well. And because I started playing basketball late, I was a coach's dream because I didn't have any of the habits that had already been formed because I've been playing for so long. So every coach that I was ever privileged to play for, the way they taught me how to play, the shortcuts that they told me how to play defense or offense or a system, I had to do it exactly that way in order to be successful. So throughout my career, I heard that said more often than not about me, is that I was very coachable. And the reason for that is because I was learning as I was playing.
Yeah, that's certainly a good part there. Again, kids these days, some of them aren't coachable. Is that something that helped you or hindered you as you eventually went into coaching and you were doing the coaching to young men?
Oh, it was absolutely a help because going in as a coach, understanding that everybody doesn't learn at the same pace. You have experienced players, you have inexperienced players. And as a team, you're only going to be as good as that player, that worst player, as far as contributing. And so you have to teach as hard to make sure that player learns, especially if that player is one that's contributing in practice or certainly contributing in a game. So that really prepared me for understanding patience and making sure that I was very diligent in making sure that everybody understood exactly what it was we were trying to accomplish.
1966 to 69, you play high school. You were first team All-State as a senior. So again, you're coachable, but the talent as well had to kind of match up with that as well. What made basketball your sport, do you think?
Because of, I'd gotten tall. I was 6'5" when I left high school, and I grew another inch at UCLA. But I was agile. I could jump. I was quick. Coach Wooden loved size with quickness. And I think those combinations And then, of course, because I was listening and doing everything that the coaches, my high school coach, and then getting to UCLA, I was doing everything as at least trying to do exactly as the coach said. I was fundamentally sound. And I think that really helped me as far as, basketball and then moving forward with basketball. I could defend, I could rebound, I could score on the inside. I was a good medium range shooter. I was aggressive. I could run the lane. So it was a combination of those things, I think, that really kind of helped me when I got to UCLA, ultimately, become a starter as a junior.
Again, you mentioned Coach Wooden, John Wooden, and UCLA. When they come recruiting you, did you just say no to everybody else? Were there any other suitors that came to you at that time?
Yes. I was back in those days, recruiting was very regional. And so I was getting recruited by all of the schools that ordinarily recruited the Colorado area, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Kansas, Wyoming, all of the Colorado schools. But I had a very wise academic counselor, and she wanted to expand my recruiting. So we reached out to other schools that I had an interest in. And one of those schools, my dream school, was UCLA. So UCLA didn't come recruiting me. I actually sent a letter. And back in those days, not a videotape or a link. It was an actual game film and my transcript. As a high school senior, I sent that to UCLA. And it was at the end of my senior year. UCLA had been recruiting a very good player in Southern California. And that player had decided, instead of going to UCLA, he would go to USC. So that left one scholarship open. And when they got my letter and watched the film, they liked what they saw. And so then I got recruited. But I probably took 15 trips, whether they be local or out of state recruiting visits. You could take as many in those days as you wanted. And but UCLA was my last visit, and it would have been my last visit had it been the first visit.
And what was that first conversation like that you had with Coach Wooden, again, trying to get you to play for the Bruins?
I walked into his office. I'll never forget. It was on a Sunday. And I got out there on Friday, spent Friday and Saturday with the assistant coaches. And Sunday morning, I went into Coach Wooden's office. And I knew what he looked like because I'd seen him, on TV, and I'd seen him on basketball, the cover or inside of basketball magazines. And I was nervous when I shook his hand. His voice was firm but friendly. And he sat back down behind his desk, and I sat in a chair in front. And Coach Wooden had a great big jar of jelly beans on the top of his desk. And he goes, "Larry, would you like some jelly beans?" And I politely said no. But, who can be afraid of a guy offering you jelly beans? And so, and that really calmed me down. But when I talked to Coach, he never talked about, do you think you're good enough to play here? We talked about academics. He said, hey, you're a good student. That would be expected of you if you come here. We talked about family. We talked briefly about religion. We talked about my aspirations. But it was really a conversation where I think he was getting to know me. And I remember when we finished talking and I got up to leave, I hadn't formally been offered a scholarship yet. So I thought, well, maybe I said something wrong and Coach doesn't like me. But it was shortly after that that Gary Cunningham and Denny Crum, who later went on to be a Hall of Fame coach at Louisville, he was an assistant at UCLA. When I got with them and they were taking me to the airport, that's when the formal offer was made. So it didn't take long to make that decision.
Started with the jelly beans and ended with an offer at some point there. That's great. That's a great story. So you go there 1969, 1970, still at a time where you're not allowed to play as a freshman, right? So what was that freshman like for you? You couldn't play with the varsity team that went on to win a national championship that year, beating Jacksonville with Artis Gilmore, who we had on previously as a guest.
Yes. We they only give out one freshman award at UCLA, the Seymour Armand Award, Freshman of the Year. And you can only imagine the names on that trophy, what it reads like. And but I was awarded that trophy at the end of our freshman year. And I went home to Denver and I watched that Jacksonville game like everybody else did on national TV. It was really, at least for me, because I was on the UCLA. I was on the UCLA team, but I wasn't on the varsity team. But you feel a part of what the varsity was doing. And even though I was sitting in Denver watching the varsity team beat Jacksonville, certainly I was really happy. But I started to feel the pressure of what I knew was going to be expected of us the following year. Now, the following year, I had to make the team and, try to earn some playing time. We had Sidney Wicks, Curtis Rowe, Steve Patterson. So I wasn't, I wasn't fooling myself that I was going to step in as a sophomore and be a starter. But I knew I could fight for playing time. And plus, I knew playing against those guys every day in practice, I would get my behind beat, but I would get better. And that's certainly what happened.
Well, when you talk about practices, because you see John Wooden in games where he's just sitting, he's watching, because he always felt like the job was done in practice, right? What were those practices like? What was Coach Wooden like in those practices to help you guys get better and get ready for those games?
It was absolute controlled warfare. There were times where those 4 or 5 days in practice preparation for the games that weekend were tougher than the actual games themselves. The practices at UCLA were like being in a classroom. They were timed to the minute. You didn't walk from drill to drill. You jogged. If a drill ended on one end of the court and coach wanted to run a drill at the other, he'd blow that whistle and say down at the other end, and everybody would jog down there. So there was no wasted time. Back in the early 70s, the science of sport hadn't evolved the way it is now. And so we didn't have an official water break. So we would practice for 2.5 hours. And the only way you could get water is if you snuck over and got it, or you caught what coach was, his attention was elsewhere and you could sneak over and get it. But practices were his classroom, and he felt the games were won and lost in practice. And because we were so talented, the emphasis on fundamentals, teamwork, conditioning, those practices proved to be what Coach Wooden would say, the games are won and lost in practice. That's when all the preparation was done. So by the time we got to the weekend, it was really just an exercise. If we do what we did in practice those 4 or 5 days, then, the outcome would take care of itself.
Is it true you really never worked on the opponent, scouted the opponent? It was more all emphasis on you guys?
Yes, yes. And the reason I say yes and yes is Coach always knew what the other team was going to do, their best players, their best plays. And we might have a drill, a defensive drill that might emphasize something that the other team does well that we would see. But he would never mention that team by name. There was never a formal scouting session where he would say, okay, USC is going to run the high pick and roll, and they're going to lift punch on the other side. We never did that. The other team was never mentioned. I'll tell you a funny story. My senior year, I'm getting interviewed by a writer. We're undefeated. We're having a great year. We're picked to, obviously win the national championship. And about 3/4 of the way through the interview, the guy stops and he looks at me. He goes, Larry, you don't know who you're playing this weekend, do you? And I said, no, the name of our opponents never come up in practice. But I guarantee you they know who they're playing this weekend. But that was Coach Wooden's approach. He never mentioned the other team. And we seldom were ever told, if at all, that this wrinkle or this play was something we were going to have to defend. The emphasis every day in practice was on us.
Yeah, 1970s, no social media to go on there and see who you're playing. So you were just worried about yourself. And again, a great career. You were there during 3 national championship years, all 3 years that you played. But again, you talked about the pressure. Was there a pressure every time you won to win another one and keep that string going?
Not so much of the string. We really weren't made aware of that until my senior year. And we were, I think, at 45 in a row, and 60, was the record held by USF. Prior to that, people use the old phrase, one game at a time. And, you hear that all the time. And, sometimes, yeah, they just say that. But that's how Coach Wooden, that was the culture at UCLA. We worked hard in practice to become the best team we could become. And Coach had us convinced that he just wanted us to get a little bit better every day. So we never looked ahead. And I think that's one of the reasons why he has sustained success for so long, is because we didn't talk about winning. He never used the word winning. And his only concern was us getting better and preparing for that next opponent. The pressure that we felt, certainly was to keep the tradition going. Our fans, everyone, the media, they expected us to win because we were the best team. So we were aware of that. But there was a lot of pressure that we put on ourselves because, the team before that had won, the team before that had won. We were expected to win. We certainly felt that, if we gave it our best shot, we were going to be hard to beat. So it was more of an internal pressure than it was an external pressure.
Yeah, you were there again during the time where you had won 7 in a row, 7 national championships in a row. You win 3 of them. What was it like on campus for you? What was it like for that team on campus when you're walking around? I mean, you had to have been celebrities on your own campus at that time.
To say that life was good on campus would be an understatement. And that was pretty much true throughout, Southern California. In terms of competing for television time, airtime, popularity, we had the Lakers, and there were people that felt our fast break was better than the Lakers' fast break. That was a pretty good team. They had Jerry West and Cale Goodrich, Will Chamberlain. They're pretty good, but it was a lot of fun, and it was a humbling experience. Again, Coach Wooden preached modesty, and so we never got, full of ourselves or big-headed, but it was, I do in my own way kind of know what it feels like to be a little bit of a rock star. It was pretty nice.
Yeah, it had to be, like you said, a rock star at that time when you play for UCLA. So again, 89-1 is your record during your 3 years in the varsity team. You win 3 national championships. Do you remember the wins of those 3 national championship games more, or the loss during that time against Notre Dame back in January of 1971?
It's funny because you mentioned 89, and there are more people throughout my life post UCLA that will say, "Hey, you're 89-1. Who was the team that beat you?" I said, "You can ask me about 89 games, but you want to ask me about the one." The one loss. The only reason it stands out is because, again, it was the only one. And so in the 3 years that I was on the varsity, I only heard Coach Wooden give a speech, a team talk after a loss once. And I write about it in the book because, a couple of things that he said really stood out to me. But in high school, we finished second in the state. We didn't win the state championship. We had a great year, and we were picked to win it. We were number 1 ranked team in Colorado, but we lost in the state finals. And so until I got to UCLA, I'd never played on a championship team. And each one of those championship teams I cherish. I probably loved the first one because it was the first. The one in 72, Walton and Wilkes, Greg Lee, they were sophomores. Our average win margin, which is still a record, 52 years later, was 30.3 points per game. So none of our games were close. I celebrated that one. And then in 73, we just had our 50-year reunion for that team. I was the senior captain. And so, when I think back of each championship, they each have a special place because of, what we accomplished during that period of time. But yes, and those do stand much larger than that one loss in South Bend.
There you go. That's good. That's good to say there. And again, you're 89-1 in your 3 years. Lew Alcindor, 88-2. Now, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, is that something that you hold over him and bring up when you see him?
Never to his face. I have much respect for the big fella. I would never say that. Behind his back, I always needle him a little bit. Yeah, Kareem lost 2 games. I only lost to 1.
There you go. And you mentioned some of the players you play with, and Bill Walton, certainly a personality. How did he challenge Coach Wooden, and how is he with you guys? Because again, he's a free spirit, and I'm sure that took Coach Wooden a little while to kind of accept that maybe and let him be the person that he was.
Yeah, Bill challenged Coach, but Bill challenged everybody. Bill was a great teammate, and I love Bill Walton. I'll tell you a really quick story about him. My senior year was Bill's junior year, and we had just beaten Notre Dame to break the 60-game win streak. So we just won that game, and the next weekend we were going to play USC. So it's pretty good basketball stretch for us. But my birthday was right in between the Notre Dame game and the USC game. So in the locker room, after practice, one of those practice days, Bill announces to the team that everybody's coming over to his house. He had a room in a frat house. He announced the whole team was coming over to his apartment for a brief birthday celebration for Larry Farmer. So I said, "Well, Bill, after training table, I've got a date." He said, "Hey, she can wait." And everybody, once practice ends, everybody shower quickly, get over to the training table, eat as fast as you can, and we're going over to my house and celebrate Farmer's birthday. And he stayed after everybody. Everybody ate quickly. Everybody went over to Bill's. And it was just one of those things where we were close on the court, but much, much closer off the court. And we were all there. He organized it. And we laugh about that to this day. He was obviously a phenomenal player, but he was even a better teammate. He did challenge Coach, but it was Coach's program, and he could only challenge Coach to a point, because we all knew that if there was going to be a winner and loser in a challenge, it was going to be Coach Wooden.
Yeah, he was definitely the face of that program. And so, again, you helped this team win 88 straight games during your time. You're part of that. That can't be something. You can't think that's something that's going to ever be broken, is it?
No. When I graduated, we had won 75 games in a row. And then the following year, I was the graduate assistant on the staff. I had gotten drafted by the Denver Rockets and the Cleveland Cavaliers, but I went to camp and I didn't make the team. So I came back to UCLA. Coach Wooden had the graduate assistant position open for me. And they won 13 games before, once again, losing at Notre Dame. 88 games in a row, 7 national championships in a row, 10 championships in 12 years. Those accomplishments, and probably even more so now because of the way college basketball is structured, where you don't get players staying at one place for 4 years. Now with, players able to transfer and be eligible right away, I guess it's hard for these coaches now to keep guys there for 2 years. But there are a number of factors that factor into it. But those accomplishments, I can't see those ever being broken.
I've done a lot of reading on Coach Wooden, his Wooden-isms. Failing to prepare, preparing to fail is kind of one that I live by as a broadcaster and get ready for these interviews.
Yes.
You have one that you kind of have lived by, or one that's really stuck to you? And also I've got my pyramid of success as well. I'm sure you have this somewhere in that house as well.
Yes. I preached this to my kids, and this year I actually coached all-girls Catholic school, Woodlands Academy. And I had those girls quoting Coach Wooden. And one of my favorites of all time, is it's amazing how much can be accomplished when no one is concerned over who gets the credit. The title of my book is Role of a Lifetime. And, every great team, sports team that you think of, every great organization that you think of, you have superstars, you have people that excel. And then you have role players, and those role players have to excel at what they do in order for this thing to all work, certainly at a championship level. And that quote about not being concerned over what, you do, but be more concerned over what the team does, to me is something that that I live by. And that was one that I have quoted. I've coached all over the world, and I'm probably sure that every place I've ever been, whether it be Germany or Kuwait, I have players there that can quote Coach Wooden in their own language, and that would be one of them.
Another story I've always heard from him, and I worked at Campbell University for a while. He would always come to camps there, and the one thing he would teach campers, the first thing would about putting on their socks. how to put their socks on the right way, because that really affects obviously their feet and how they're going to perform out there. Is that something that he did with you guys as well?
We had a team meeting before the start of each season. And at that team meeting, coach would give, you'd have two handouts. And on one handout, there was probably a list of 20 things, the expectations of a UCLA basketball player. It had to, do with being in class every day and being on time and just everything off the court. And then he had another sheet, another handout, and it probably had about 25 items. And it was the expectations of a UCLA basketball player. And this all had to do with practice. And so coach would read through each one of these items one by one. So there would be, no reason that you as a player would not understand what was expected of you off the court, in the classroom, and on the court, and during practice, and in the locker room. And then once coach would finish going over the rules and expectations, he was usually doing this behind a podium. He would walk over, sit down, take off his shoe and his sock, and then he would proceed to show us the correct way to put on your socks so there weren't any wrinkles on the bottom, because, wrinkles on the bottom, you could get blisters. And if you get blisters on your feet, you can't play. You can't change the direction. You can't do any of those things. So he would show us the proper way to put on your socks and pull them up nice and snug and taut. And then he showed us the exact proper way to tie your shoes, to make sure that you got those laces tight, pulled them all the way up, and tied those shoes properly. So, the first time it happened, I was a freshman, and we've got all these All-Americans up here and coaches doing it. And, they're sitting there and they're quiet. And the freshmen, we're all in the back and we're looking around. Can you believe we're doing this? And, but yeah, we did that every year during that preseason meeting. He did it every year to show us exactly how to put on our socks and shoes.
Yeah, attention to detail certainly worked out when you look at his career. As you said, you were drafted by the NBA, the ABA, but you elected to be a member of his staff. Why do that? Why did you not play professionally and instead go into coaching under Coach Wooden?
That's another one of the really, I think, interesting things in the book that I wrote. I like everybody else, I thought that I would be an NBA player, an ABA player. And I was drafted. I went to UCLA. We won championships. I got a lot of exposure, and I was drafted. When I went to camp at Cleveland, the skill set that they were looking for was more for a guy that was, in today's terms, would have been a three-point shooter. They had two guys that were already on no-cut contracts that did exactly that. And my skill set, I was a good rebounder in the fast break, a mid-range shooter, not a long-range shooter. And so when I went to camp, I survived rookie camp. In those days, they drafted 12 rookies. Wow. So you had a full week of rookie camp. They cut 9 of those rookies and brought 3 of us back to veteran camp. I survived veteran camp, had a great veteran camp, and then played well in the exhibition season. But I was released 3 days before the season started. Coach Wooden had been following my progress the whole time I was at Cleveland. He was calling Bill Fitch, who was the head coach at Cleveland, to check on how Larry's doing. How's he doing? And he kept the graduate assistant coaching position open for me in the event that I didn't make the team. It goes back to what you and I talked about initially about being coachable. I listened to everything he taught me because I had to do it in order to play. And I think he always felt, because of that at some point I would make a good coach. And so I wasn't thinking that I was going to start coaching then. I thought my coaching career would start somewhere down the road. But it gave me great experience working on his staff for a year. The following year, I played professional basketball over in Europe. It was a great opportunity for me to play, get paid. I made more money over there than I would have played if I had stayed in the States, as a 7th round draft choice. And then the following year, when Coach Wooden won his last championship and retired, Gene Bartow was hired as head coach. And Gene Bartow wanted to hire a guy on his staff that played for Coach Wooden, that had coaching experience. And because of that 1 year of being a GA, that kind of put me in the front of that line. And after 1 year playing professional basketball, I was hired at UCLA full-time as an assistant coach. So it all kind of came together.
Yeah, he was looking out for you again, as you said. You were coachable, and look where it led you because of that. And take us through the moment when you heard that Coach Wooden was going to retire. 27 years, 10 titles, still kind of a young guy, but he decided to hang it up. What was that like around the facility, the offices there, when you heard that this guy, so revered at UCLA, was going to step aside?
Yeah, I was, as I mentioned, I was in Germany, and my parents called me. We talked every Sunday, and so we had talked earlier that week. And when Coach Wooden made the announcement, after Saturday's game, my parents called me back, and they said, we just heard that Coach Wooden had announced before the championship game that he was going to retire. And I was sad. I mean, I was really sad because, as Coach Wooden called the guys that played for him his boys, and we loved it. He would always give us that disclaimer. Now, I don't mean it in a negative way. So, no, Coach, we understand. That's your way of telling us you love us. We're one of your boys, or I was one of his boys. And he was invincible to me. How could he retire? He wasn't old enough. He wasn't tired. He was still full of vigor. And, I remember him every day at practice. But I was sad when I heard that. It was like an era of history was coming to an end, and I had been a part of that. And I was sad, very sad to see that he was going to leave.
And I'm sure it had to be a difficult transition. Gene Bartow took over. Then it was Gary Cunningham, then Larry Brown, and then eventually you as the head coach. But how tough was it? I mean, no social media at the time probably was a good thing, but I'm sure everyone was, putting you guys up against Coach Wooden and what he did during his time, and nobody can do what he did.
No, and you're exactly right. There was no social media, but obviously what media there was focused on us, and LA being a media hub. It was. I was not naive to what was going to be expected of the coach that followed Coach Wooden, because, if you think of the dynasty as the Frankenstein monster, I was a part of that monster. And then when Coach Bartow took over, now I'm on the other side of that. I'm on the staff that's immediately following Coach Wooden's staff. And Coach Bartow went 52-9, 52 wins and 9 losses in 2 years. And a lot of universities, they put a statue of you out in front if you go 52-9. But because he was following Coach Wooden, I don't know if he could have done enough other than win 2 championships in a row to have satisfied, those whose expectations with 10 championships in 12 years had become a little bit, I say, distorted. But it was tough. But when I became the head coach after Coach Bartow for 2 years, and then Gary Cunningham, who played for Coach Wooden and who was on his staff for 10 years, and then Larry Brown for 2 years, I knew what to expect. I knew what was going to be expected of me. So there was always going to be pressure, but I wasn't naive to the fact that I knew what kind of winning was expected. That still holds true to this day. Now, a lot of time has passed, and so, the coaches that have since come into the program aren't measured necessarily by that same yardstick. But the expectation, because of those 4 letters, is still very, very high. And we like it that way. And the players that come there and the coaches that are there now, Coach Cronin, he knows that. He says it all the time. We know what's expected. And that's the way it should be.
Yeah, you're still UCLA. So, but again, 3 coaches in 6 years, you're elevated 1981, 82. Any hesitation of becoming the head coach?
None. I was 30 years old. And, when you're 30, you think you can do anything.
Sure.
And, even with my lack of experience, I had 7 years of assistant coaching experience, 7 years. But I had grown up in that system. I had grown up around UCLA basketball. So for a naive, inexperienced 30-year-old guy, I probably was as well prepared to be the next coach there as anybody else, fitting that description. And looking back, I would do and make the same decision now that I did then. Be a lot more nervous about it now. So I'm 72 years old, and I know a lot more now than I knew then. But what a great experience. I think of the day that I accepted the head coaching job at UCLA. It was 12 years after I was in Coach Wooden's office as a recruit. I went from being offered jelly beans 12 years earlier to sitting in that seat, knowing that now that office was my office. It still gives me goosebumps when I think about it.
And obviously at the time as well, you're the first black head coach of any sport, right? At UCLA, a school that produced Jackie Robinson and what he did to break the color barrier in Major League Baseball. Was that something that a point of pride for you, or was it also something that was maybe a challenge for you to be that and kind of be that guy that maybe people looked up to?
There was already, many built-in pressures and expectations. I knew because of UCLA's history that them hiring me as the first black coach in any sport there was something that they took great pride in doing. One of the reasons that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar decided to go to UCLA was because of Jackie Robinson and Arthur Ashe and Dr. Ralph Bunch. UCLA had been a trailblazer in that way. I looked up to people like George Raveling and John Thompson, Fred Snowden, who was at Arizona, John Chaney, who was at Temple. Those were black coaches that had come before me. None of them were given programs that had a winning tradition or a winning history, but they built those programs. And I always felt because of the success they had, it also made it easier for UCLA to make that decision about me. And so when I got that job, I'm inheriting a program that, not only had a winning tradition, but had the winning tradition. And I certainly didn't want to disappoint on a number of levels. But I did know that the way I carried myself, the job that I did would reflect and maybe open up other opportunities for minority coaches and black coaches, just as those who had come before me had done for me. First day that I got the head job at UCLA, I wrote those four black coaches that I just mentioned. I wrote them each a letter, and I thanked them for the path that they set in place for coaches like me to follow.
Yeah, some incredible names you mentioned there. George Raveling, again, one of the greatest, certainly in college basketball. John Thompson, John Chaney as well. And so, again, for you, it's 3 years there, a successful run. You sign a 2-year extension, but then you resign after that. And I know you talk about this in the book, but what led to that? What led to you deciding, okay, this is the time to move on?
I loved the experience there. I wanted to continue. I knew what was expected. I thought at the time that I needed a few more tools in place. Chancellor Young, who I love to this day, believed in me. He trusted in me. It was his decision to hire me in the first place, as a 30-year-old guy. And so when he gave me the contract extension, I just wanted a few more things that we needed in place in terms of recruitment and academics. And so when those things were, and you mentioned it, I go into great detail in the book. When I saw that those things might probably happen, but they weren't going to happen when I needed them to happen, I did not want to be at the program and not have success. And I didn't think that I could do it under the circumstances in which I was going to have to operate. And so it broke my heart. You talk about a difficult decision. One of the hardest decisions I've ever made in my life. With 2 years added onto my contract, I essentially had a new 3-year contract. And I agreed to it. And then I had a weekend to really kind of kick it around in my head. And then I decided that, unlike the other coaches that had preceded me that lasted 2 years, I had beaten them all by 3, and it was probably time to leave. I wrestled with that decision for about 10 years. And it wasn't until I went back to UCLA 10 years later that I knew then that I'd made the right decision to leave when I did.
And you didn't leave coaching. You moved on, Weber State, eventually Loyola Chicago as well. What do you remember about some of those stops and some of the high points during those times for you?
Yeah, every place that I've coached, I've been able to take what I've learned at UCLA, the foundation of the fundamentals, different aspects of the pyramid of success, a lot of the Wooden-isms that we talked about. And, whether it be at Weber State, I coached the Kuwait national team after the Gulf War. I was an assistant coach with the Golden State Warriors. I had an opportunity to coach at Loyola Chicago. I've coached in every time zone. And the thing that I've enjoyed the most, I love practice. I love teaching in practice. Again, I get that from Coach Wooden. That's a part of my foundation, the preparation of practice. And then understanding that basketball sport is just a vehicle to teach young men, and this year, young girls, life lessons, things that will prepare them for life. And through basketball, just like Coach Wooden did for all of his boys, sharing elements of the pyramid of success and talking about things that you learn through sport that will help you be successful in life. I think each place that I've stopped or that I've coached or been a part of, I've been able to do that. Again, thanks to him, I've been able to share that, to pass that knowledge, pass it forward. And so each place that I've coached, I've enjoyed doing it because of what I've been able to share.
Loyola Chicago, I've got to ask you, was Sister Jean there at the time when you were with the Chicago?
Yes, she was. Sister Jean was in her first year of being the team chaplain, my first year as head coach. So we were both kind of rookies at the same time. And she was saying, she was, what a nice person. And she did. Now, her prayers have gotten better because she's incorporated a lot more scouting reports into her prayers. But when she first started, her pregame prayers were I told her one time, we're in the locker room and Sister Jean prayed that we win the game. And after she finished praying, I said, Sister Jean, the team had left the locker room. I said, Sister Jean, you can't ask the good Lord for us to win because maybe the other coach is praying that they win. She goes, yeah, I can pray that way because the good Lord listens to me. Oh, it was so funny. It was so funny. Oh, what a great person. Just an absolute great person.
Yeah, you've got a book out. She's got a book out as well. At 103 years old, Sister Jean is still a star there with Loyola Chicago. Well, again, stops also for you in Hawaii, Western Michigan a couple of times, a year here in our state in North Carolina with the NC State as well. And then, like you said, you're retired, but you were telling us off the air before we got started, you're never really retired. So you're doing some high school coaching now, but is this game you're just always involved with this game, it looks like?
It becomes a part of you. And because it is bigger than just, the 40 minutes that the game goes on, the relationships that you create and nurture with the players. This year, I'd never coached girls before. I have a daughter and, I'd certainly worked with her in basketball, but I'd never coached girls before and certainly never coached at the high school level. And I got so much satisfaction out of teaching those girls. Our upperclassmen were all juniors. So they're 16-year-old girls. And at the end of the season, to hear them say things like, be quick, but don't hurry. Be on time when time's involved. Failure to prepare is preparing to fail, like you like the one that you like. I'm hearing these 16-year-old girls say that. And you uplifted my spirits. And I know up in heaven, Coach Wooden is smiling because his legacy is continuing.
Yeah, you certainly probably one that maybe the closest to his legacy right now. And you mentioned, the first time you met him. Do you remember the last time you had a chance to see him before he did pass away and leave us?
Yes. I was coaching. I was coaching at the University of Hawaii, and I had called Coach to check on him. And in those days, as his health was declining, Tony Spino, a great trainer at UCLA, he also worked for the Milwaukee Bucks. But Tony worked at UCLA, and the athletic department decided to assign Tony, although he was still on contract at UCLA, they assigned him full-time to take care of Coach Wooden. And so when I wanted to check on Coach Wooden's health, I would call Tony, and Tony was literally staying with Coach 24 hours a day. I would call Tony and, just to find out how Coach was doing. Well, on this particular day, I called Tony, and he answered his cell phone. He goes, hey, Larry, I'm just getting Coach Wooden in the car. He just had a doctor's appointment. So I said, okay, Tony, well, I'll call you back. He goes, no, hold on. And so Tony hands Coach Wooden the phone. And Coach Wooden says, Larry, how you doing, fella? And I said, Coach, I'm great. Coach, how are you? And we had a brief conversation. And at the end of the conversation, Coach told me he loved me. And I told him that I loved him. I'm getting choked up. And Tony called me back later. And he said that Coach was having a really good day that day. And he didn't want that day to go by since I had called without me having a chance to talk to Coach. And that's why, even though he was in the middle of putting him in the car, getting him settled as they were leaving the hospital to go back to the condo, he put him on. And that was the last time that I talked to him. And the last thing that we said to each other was that, we loved each other.
And again, from the outside, people see the wins, they see the championships, but from the inside, you guys and what he meant to you, it seems like it's so special. And certainly I appreciate you sharing that story with us here today. And he was a good player during his days at Purdue as well. Did he ever hop into practice and kind of show you how to do things? I mean, again, he was still young enough that I'm sure he showed you guys a few things.
No, he never hopped into practice. But, we'd heard that he was a 3-time All-American. And when there were certain drills, especially at the beginning of the year, that Coach would introduce, and he would introduce a drill, and then he would let us do the drill. And then the next day we would come back through repetition, and then he would start to really hone in on the fundamentals. And then we would do it again and do it again. And so that's how he taught drills. Well, there would be certain drills where Coach would jump in, like if it was a drill where he wanted to show how to dribble handoff or a real crisp post exchange. And he might jump in and his footwork would be precise, and he would, he'd have the ball and it would be, in triple threat position, and that 2-inch pass was perfect. And he would jump in and he would demonstrate, but it was always, just a few little things. But, to actually get in a drill and to all out participate, he never did that. But we could always tell because of the way he handled himself in the ball that he knew what he was doing.
As you watch games now, UCLA, other teams as well, do you see what he was teaching then still in play now, or has a game evolved and changed that much to where somebody like him, maybe the game wouldn't translate for him?
With the way players dribble the ball now and they're allowed to carry and the ball come to rest and put the hand on the side, as you can tell, I'm really annoyed with this one. That would not have set well with him. It gives the offense such a great advantage when you can control the ball, not with your hand on the top like we had to do in the old days, but when you can put it on the side. But if you think of the way we describe players today, the really great players today that we all love to watch, the word versatile is now becoming popular again. Basketball for a while was very specialized and everybody had to be able to do specific things. And now to be versatile. And what does versatility mean? Well, you can shoot it from the inside, shoot it from the outside. You can dribble, you can pass it, you can score with either hand. These were fundamentals. These were the things that Coach Wooden taught and preached. And so the game from that standpoint of being versatile, being fundamentally sound, making great decisions, that is what he teach. That's what he taught. The way the game is played now, where a lot of really good teams focus on the screen and roll action, and because of the 3-point line, the floor is spaced and there's a lot of standing and waiting for the ball. That would not have been something that he would have liked, because he liked movement, created problems for the defense. But the pure fun and joy of teaching the fundamentals and how to dribble, pass, and shoot to be in great shape and to play as a team, he would very much be a great coach in this era.
That said, you guys in this era, how would your team stack up? Again, you're a 3-time national champion, 89-1 record in your 3 years in the varsity team. How would those teams stack up to today's game?
As long as Bill Walton and Jamal Wilkes were healthy, we would have been fine.
There you go. That's a good 2 to start with, right? Those two, you as the role guy.
Guys, yeah, they were healthy. We would have been fine. Now, if we had any problems with them, some of these teams with their quickness and athleticism, they might have given us a problem. But I'll take my chances with those two guys.
Larry, again, this has been so much fun here. Again, as a fan of John Wooden as I am, to hear the stories from you from the inside. And I know you talk about those in your career in your book. Again, tell us about your book. It's out already now. Where can people get that?
Yes, you can get the book at Barnes and Nobles, Amazon, Walmart, all the major outlets. And I thought long and hard about writing it. It took 2 years to write, but I thought about doing it for 40 years, ever since I left UCLA. And I thought it would be a good read for sports fans, basketball fans, human interest. I devote one small chapter to the importance of being a role player. I think any high school coach or high school kid or college coach would want to read that and understand, especially with the transfer rules being the way it is. When you make a decision, how to stick that decision out and fight your way through it. But, because of the view that I had of UCLA and the dynasty, being a player, winning 3 championships, and then immediately being on the staffs that followed, it's a unique insight into the inner workings of UCLA and the stories that I tell. I think people will learn a lot more about a lot of my teammates, certainly about Coach Wooden, the relationships. And it was a great ride. And I really enjoyed sharing the story about what it looked like to be a part of the UCLA dynasty.
Yeah, you get Bill Walton and Jamal Wilkes involved with that as well. Again, you're a great embodiment of not just UCLA, but Coach Wooden, what he was. And it makes sense that you would write a book like this, having played for him and coached with him as well. And certainly those girls don't know how lucky they are to have you as their head coach, man. As you said, the lessons that you're giving them, they're giving it back to you. So you're certainly making a difference. And I can't thank you enough for sharing such amazing stories with us here today.
Oh, super. Thank you, Michael. It was great. Had a lot of fun.
Well, another great guest, Larry Farmer. We appreciate his time and the tremendous stories he had to share with John Wooden, especially if you're a fan of John Wooden like I am. I'm sure you appreciated that. If you did like this episode, be sure to like it. Be sure to subscribe as well to our podcast. More great guests, more great stories coming your way soon in the front row with Mike Vaccaro. So again, our thanks to Larry Farmer. Do check out his book as well if you want to hear more on Farmer and his role with UCLA, his relationship as well with John Wooden. Until next time, once again, we'll see you next time for another edition of In the Front Row with Mike Vaccaro. Have a great day, everybody.